We're turning it over now to our research presentations. So we have Julie Nattel up first. Welcome. I'll give you the, just so you know, I'll give you the 10-minute, or sorry, once you're at 10 minutes, I'll give you the little 5-minute warning, and you can choose to either go into a question period or continue up to that 15-minute mark. So we'll let you take it away.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. Let me just share my slide. Okay, so I see a lot of people, so that's great. I don't see a lot of faces though. So if you're around and you look professional, so you have a shirt on and pants on, you can actually turn your camera on. That would be great. Well, thanks for being here. So do you see my screen? Yeah, cool. So I just want to share my research program. So you have a good idea just looking at the slide here of what we're doing in the lab. I put a title, Motion Analysis from Physical Activity to Innovative Technologies, because that's really what we do. In one part of there's 3 axes in my research program. So one is the physical activity and mobility in, I said PD here, which is Parkinson's disease, but also in older adults. We're doing a lot of work on mobility and cognition, so mild cognitive impairments. And we're developing a lot of different kind of technologies to actually push a little bit forward what we can do in motion analysis. So I'm going to start with physical activity and mobility. So working with Parkinson's disease, we know that physical activity is a really good type of treatment for them. So to reduce tremor, for example, but also to gain more muscle mass. That is often a problem in Parkinson's disease. And also to go outside and live a social life. So I'm pretty sure if I asking you what you know about Parkinson's disease, you'll say tremor, for example, but there's a lot of motor impairment as well. And one of them is actually a lot of falls. So people with PD have a tendency to, as the disease progresses, to fall quite a bit. And we're trying with physical activity to make sure that we are keeping them as independent as possible for as long as possible. So here you have the Knocking Out Parkinson's disease, which is a group of people that do boxing. And so I'm going to try to ask you one question here and see if there's someone that is going to answer. So just open your mic and talk to me. But why do you think boxing is a good idea in Parkinson's disease? Cassandra?
It's a ballistic movement.
Okay, ballistic movements, that's a good one. And it's also a lot of this movement in different directions, right? So you have movement in the AP direction, the anterior posterior direction, but a lot of medial lateral direction as well. So what you're doing basically in asking them to move in all the directions and putting them actually at risk of falling and making sure that they know how to recover from those potential falls. Obviously, you don't want them to fall, but it happens anyway in their real life. So you want them to be able to know also how to fall. Another thing in Parkinson's disease, besides tremor, is being super rigid. So they have a tendency to have all their arms kind of flexed. The posture is a little bit stooped like this, and they have a hard time doing large movement with their lower end and upper limbs. So let's say, for example, I'm trying to reach for a cup. So you and me would just do this, reach for the cup, and that's it. So if I'm already stooped like this and I'm trying to reach for that cup and my arm is not doing that full range of motion, what I'm doing is that I'm bent like this, and then I'm going forward as I'm reaching because my arm is kind of pulling me forward, and my center of mass is now forward as well. So we're trying with boxing to make sure that we gain this range of motion, and we actually try for them not to lose it more than what they already have. And so we've shown really good results with boxing. And so what participants say, like, even besides just having like good biomechanical results, is that they feel really good about themselves because they're able to move, and they're able to show their family members, their partners, that they're actually able to do physical activity without falling, without having other people thinking that they have PD all the time, and they feel pretty good. So there's also a social and a psychological aspect to it. So that's the first part. So we're really, excuse me, trying to see what would be the best type of physical activity for that population. And there's also Nordic walking. Nordic walking it's kind of easy to see. You have poles to walk, therefore, like you don't have just a small base of support when you're walking, but you also have your arms with the poles on the ground. So you have a way bigger base of support, which then makes sure that you are not falling. So that's one. Can I have a time check, ladies? Anna?
You're at 51, so you got 4 more minutes or until question period, or you can go till 7.
Perfect. So another one, still in Parkinson's disease, is the link between falls, freezing of gait, and mild cognitive impairments. So falls, that's pretty easy. You walk, you turn around, and then you fall. So freezing of gait is another problem with people with Parkinson's disease, and it actually causes falls as well. So freezing of gait is basically, I'm walking normally, and then I see a carpet, for example, and then just the transition between hardwood floor and a carpet is kind of a lot of information that I need to, normally you and me would not even think about it. We don't need that information when we're walking. But people with Parkinson tend to take all the information and try to process that information. So what it does is, like, if you have a lot of information that you need to process at the same time, and you're also trying to walk, something has to give. And for this specific phenotype of people with Parkinson's disease, what gives is actually the walking part. So we're trying to see what causes freezing of gait. And there's a big link with cognitive impairments. So what we know is that people that have this specific phenotype of freezing also develop quite frequently cognitive impairments. And as one goes up, the other one goes up as well. So we're trying to see if we can slow down the progression of both freezing of gait and cognitive impairment. How? By using physical activity as well. So that's one thing we're doing. And actually, excuse me. So here on the drawing, what you actually see is a freeze. So what we're asking our people to do here is that, just, you don't see my feet, I know, but just walking in place like this. And so the red lines that you see here are actually real cycles that people are doing. And this here is a freeze. So what you see is the person kind of doing the task and then stopping and then trying to do the task. But what you see is just like this movement here. So without the feet completely leaving the ground. So now that we know exactly what a freeze looks like in real life, what we're trying to do, which is bringing me to my last part, is trying to use new technologies to overcome the freeze in one part and overcome the falls, but also to predict freezing of gait. So what we do is that we take IMUs. IMUs are in your phone. They are in your smart watch as well. And so we take that signal and we try to figure out which part of the signal could give us the same information as this information. This is on a force platform, so it's very easy to see what's happening, but we're trying to see, are we able with the sensors to figure out what's happening during a freeze, directly during a freeze, and right before a freeze. So if we're able to predict what a freeze looks like just before it happens, then we're able to potentially send a signal to our participants or patients to say, you're about to freeze in a second or in 2 seconds, and therefore we're going to zap a muscle, for example, and help them do that step. So you can cue with just a noise if you want to, just like put a headset and just send a noise that is going to be kind of giving a trigger to say, okay, you need to step. Or we can directly go to the muscle. Oh, I don't have a picture of that. We can directly go to the muscle and actually activate the muscle to push on the ground and make that step. So we're actually doing exactly that right now, and we're able to predict a freeze up to 1.5 seconds before the freeze. So now the next part is really developing the device itself, so we can personalize those cues to different kind of phenotypes of people with PD. And potentially what you see here is actually developing remote assessment of their gait and remote assessment of their mobility in general, and take all the information, process the information, send that to their clinician, and the clinician can then look at the report, send a report back to the patient and say, okay, now that we know exactly how you move in your daily activities, we can change your medication, we can come in for a surgery, or we can just make sure that we prescribe good physical activity treatment. So that's what we do in the lab. So now I'm open for questions.
Dr. Nantel, could you like almost compare that to like a pacemaker for your heart, if you're like zapping the muscle kind of thing?
No, because it's not. So a pacemaker or deep brain stimulation, what we actually do for freezing of gait or for Parkinson in general, is quite invasive because it's under the skin for the pacemaker, and for the deep brain stimulation, it goes from under the skin directly to your brain. So that's quite invasive, right? So what we're doing, I think I have a picture. Almost. So what we're doing is, here you have the IMUs and you have EMG as well. And it's basically like on your IMUs, you can just put that little a sticker like this. And that sticker is giving a signal almost just like a vibration almost. So you vibrate your muscle. And here what we would want to do is vibrate which muscle. If you're pushing using your calf muscles, right? So we'd want to stimulate those muscles really slightly, just to give a cue. So we could give a cue and then make sure that the person is, okay, I feel this, so now I'm going to move my leg. Or we could, for someone that has more intense freezing of gait, we could actually give a larger cue, so a bigger vibration or bigger signal to the muscle to say like, okay, now I'm going to help you recontract the muscle fibers. So it does compare a little bit, but it's not invasive.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I just have a question too. This is all so interesting, and I'm wondering if you foresee what some of the applications could be to this technology one day. Could there be something that an individual with Parkinson's disease could wear in their daily life that could stimulate muscle movement when they need it?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, because it's always what the clinicians are asking us, right? So you're doing all this, why, right? So the good answer is showing this picture here. So now we're in a place where we can design smart, it's all in French, but smart clothing. So what we are looking into is putting sensors in socks, for example. So because we're working with the leg, right? So if you put sensors in the socks, like IMUs in the socks, and also like that stimulator in the socks as well, then the person is able to wear the device without anyone knowing that they have a device on themselves. So in real life, give us 5-10 years maybe, and we'll probably be able to do that, and try as well for each of our participants, each of our patients.
That's great. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Professor, I had a question about the research. Do you foresee the development of your research to also be adaptable with the development of the disease itself as it gets worse with the patients?
So are you asking specifically for freezing of gait?
Yes, so we know that Parkinson's will develop over time and it will get worse until it reaches all of the parts of the body. How do you see that your research might become so advanced that even at the most advanced stages of Parkinson's, it would still help?
So the problem is that we don't know. So I would be lying to you if I was saying that I knew. But what we want to do and continue developing is developing our sensors and our devices, but also connect our devices with a deep brain simulator as well. So what you have here is in the surgery room. So they're putting a deep brain simulator in the brain. And if we're able to get the signal from the brain and the signal from the sensors, combine those, then we're able to really develop a specific signal for our participant and knowing exactly what's happening in the brain. So as the disease progresses, we're able to also make our device better and better, hopefully.
Thank you. That's amazing research, honestly.
Thank you.
Thanks for presenting today. That was really interesting. I personally have never sat through a little briefing of your research, so that was really cool.
Thank you.
If anyone has any question or any other questions, feel free to let me know and I can send them your way, Julie, if that's okay with you.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Thanks for your time this evening. We're moving on now to Paul Heinzman, if he's somewhere in the house.
I'm here.
Oh, you're in the house. Perfect. Welcome.
I just need to share my screen.
Yeah, you should be able to.
So to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm gonna give you like the nice 5-minute wave, and that will tell you whether or not you can continue your presentation or open it up to questions for those 5 minutes.
So I guess my camera isn't on, is it?
Nope, we just see your name.
Oh, here we go.
Oh, perfect.
Okay, so I have a lot of slides, so I may skip over some quickly because we have limited time. So I'm talking about gross density use, Gatineau Hills versus Banff Mountains. Some of you may have been to Gatineau Park and some of you to Banff Park. You see pictures there. I'll skip over the overview and just move right in. So what is density? So it's a descriptive term that refers to the number of people per unit and it is measured by counting the number of people and measuring the space that they occupy. It can be determined objectively. Crowding, on the other hand, is a negative evaluation of density. It involves your value judgment of whether there's too many people. So it's a perception. You perceive that there is crowding. Some of you may have been to Banff National Park. It's Canada's first national park. And you can see down here at the bottom that they had over 3 million person visits in 2011, 2012, and over 4 million person visits 2017, 2018. There's ski resorts and campgrounds, trails, and so on. And so it's Canada's first national park. What I want to point out in this map is the brown color. 93% of Banff National Park is zoned wilderness. There's 5 different zones in Parks Canada, National Parks zoning system, but Banff National Park, the majority is wilderness and the outdoor recreation is 1%, and that's in the yellow spots, very small spots in the park. Gatineau Park is not a national park, it's a federal park. And what is unique about it, as you can see in this map here, is this little wedge, pink wedge, that extends right down close to the urban area of Ottawa-Gatineau. There you see it again, close up. And it's the Canadian Shield, lots of natural habitats, lots of wildlife, fauna, and it's surrounded by farmland and urban areas. You can see it's comes in the urban area. And it has 4 different zones, conservation zones from 1 until to 4. So it's different than Banff National Park, but the darker area here along the early escarpment is the most sensitive area. And then the next lightest brown is the next sensitive area. So as you're probably familiar, there's lots of summer recreation opportunities they can see in this slide. Also recreation opportunities in the winter. The main cultural attraction is Mackenzie King Estate, and there was overnight use in terms of camping, winter shelters. And so in 2004, it's estimated there was 1.7 million visitors, 2.7 in 2012. 85% comes from the National Capital Region. They come by car. This graph shows you the use at the south entrance on Gamelin Boulevard. You can see the high point is Labor Day and Thanksgiving. That's the Fall Rhapsody. This shows the use coming into through Chelsea. And so this is more evenly distributed, but you can see again, the highest peaks are in the fall, during the Fall Rhapsody, Thanksgiving, earlier Labor Day, and also in the winter time when people are skiing and snowshoeing. And so in 2004, there was a preliminary master plan. And what I want to emphasize here, it said that the use was 8 times the annual visits per square kilometer as Banff National Park. And in the master plan, they included this diagram with a number of different parks from across Canada and also Shenandoah, United States, and natural recreation areas in the United States. And they showed that Gatineau Park had the highest use per square kilometer of any of these parks across Canada and throughout North America. And so they're talking about concern about increasing visitor numbers, and they've continued to use such information. Here's the visits per year in national parks in Gatineau Park. And so Banff National Park has the greatest number of visitors of over 3 million, and Gatineau Park has 2.7 million. So it's argued that Gatineau Park is the second most visited park in Canada in terms of federal parks. But here then they show the visitors per square kilometer. And you see when they compare parks across the Canada, Gatineau Park has by far the greatest gross density use. That is the number of visitors per square kilometer. And so then this has got into sort of popular culture that it's a very visited park. So this article in the Ottawa Citizen 2015, as many as Banff National Park, which is 10 times larger. There's a lot of pressure on the park. And then this letter, which is written to the Lowdown, which is the local paper in Chelsea in December, just 3 months ago. Gatineau Park is the most heavily visited park in North America on a per capita basis. Well, I'm going to challenge some of that. First of all, I don't know if you can see the heading up here because my up the top, it says measurement. So Parks Canada measures the people that visit in a certain way, and that's pretty consistent across the country. And it's each time a person enters the land or marine part of the reporting unit for recreational, education, or cultural purposes during business hours. And so they have a very scientific way of measuring the number of visitors into their parks, and it's fairly consistent across the country, although there is some estimates involved in these decisions. However, for Gatineau Park, they determine their visitors based on estimates. So there's an on-site intercept survey, and there's also a telephone survey of local residents. So you're making an estimate, you're not necessarily measuring or counting everyone that comes in. So the first point I want to make is that when we compare different parks, they may not be measuring their visitors the same way. Secondly, my second point is, are parks comparable? And this is taken from a paper I published in 2010. And so here I have this graph again from 2004 preliminary master plan. And I say that this type of comparison is not necessarily the most appropriate, as these parks reflect differences in terms of type, national, provincial, etc., size, and distance from urban centers. So in other words, I'm saying not all parks are the same. You can compare apples with apples, but even there's different types of apples, but you can't really compare apples and oranges. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to be comparing a park such as Banff National Park with Gatineau Park. And so I go on in this paper I published in 2010, saying that maybe something more comparable is Fish Creek Provincial Park, which is adjacent to Calgary. and it's smaller in size, Gatineau Park, yet it has twice as many annual visitors in 2010 than Gatineau Park. And another comparison is Acadia National Park, which is much more approximate in size to Gatineau Park than Banff National Park, and has approximately the same number of visitors in 2006 or 2004 at 2.4 million. So the point I'm making is you can't compare all parks being the same. So this is the graph I've shown before, that they claim that Gatineau Park is such a high gross density use. And so here I have comparisons with other parks that may be more comparable. So Fish Creek Provincial Park has a much higher gross density use than Gatineau Park. Acadia National Park in Maine has a higher gross density use, and Cayuga Valley National Park in Ohio has a higher gross density use as well. And I would say that these parks are more comparable with Gatineau Park than is Banff National Park. Here's some more. This is just data from another year, 2011, 2012, and you see Acadia National Park and Cayuga Valley National Park in the United States both have gross density use that is greater than Gatineau Park. So here's another NCC document based on 2012 visitor statistics, and they compare parks across Canada, national parks, and again, Gatineau Park, which is not a national park, it's a federal park, is compared, and you see a much higher gross density use. But there are some parks missing from this graph. So if you look at some other small parks that have high visitors, such as PEI National Park, Point Pelee National Park, both of these parks have a higher gross density use than Gatineau Park. Another issue, issue 4, is I mentioned that I said that Banff National Park has this very large area of wilderness, and Gatineau Park does not have a similar large wilderness. So if we take out the wilderness zone of Banff National Park and take the other 3 zones and do the comparison, Banff National Park has a higher gross density use than Gatineau Park. Okay, I still have a few moments. So then you can compare specific sites. If you say compare Banff Springs Hotel and the former O'Brien Boutique Hotel, you know there's many more visitors at Banff Springs Hotel. If you've been to Peyto Lake Lookout in Banff National Park, again, very busy throughout the whole summer, busier than Champlain Lookout. Or if you take Banff Townside or Lake Louise Townside and compare it with Old Chelsea Village, there's no comparison. Same with the major ski hills in Banff National Park versus Camp Fortune. Or Johnson Canyon Trail, which has 1 million people walk it every year. That's way more people than hike the Pink Lake Trail. Or if you look at parking lots, Lake Louise parking lot, I was there this summer, and even with COVID, they have a very elaborate system of many staff directing people in and out of this parking lot because it's so busy. Here you have O'Brien Beach parking lot. So it was interesting. I was in Banff Park on October the 1st and took a number of pictures, which you see on this side. It was snowing. It was a Monday in Banff National Park at Johnson's Canyon. The next day, my wife, I asked her to go and take pictures at various parking lots, same time of day as the previous day in Banff National Park, and you can see the parking lots are very empty. If you compare Cavan Basin, has way more visitors than Kingsmere Estate, Lake Louise versus Lake Lac Philippe. And so the assumption is that Gatineau Park has a lot of visitors, has high gross density use, but the thing is that quality of experience isn't necessarily tied to gross density use. It's tied to crowding, which is a different concept. It's also that environmental impact is based on this curve here, where the environmental impact increases with a small number of visitors and then levels out. It's not a linear, nor is it this type of relationship here. So my conclusion is that you really can't make these types of comparisons for a number of reasons, including measurement issues. And it's probably better. This is a professor I had when I was a student at the University of Ottawa. He wrote this book called Urban Recreation Open Spaces Towards a Community-Specific Standard. His argument was, he was talking about urban communities, but he said that you can't have a standard across all communities for the amount of open space you provide, but you need to have something that's community specific. So my point is, it's not this concept of gross density use, which Gatineau Park uses, or lots of people in Ottawa talk about, really isn't all that applicable. Not only is it the case that there's other parks that have higher gross density use, this concept needs to be used very carefully and with caution. So I think I'll just end it there. If you have any questions, it was a very quick run through this presentation.
Thank you very much for spending your Friday night with us. Anyone have any questions? If questions arise a little bit later, do you mind if I send them to you in an email?
That's fine.
Perfect. All right. Well, I think we are right on schedule. Do we have a Christine Dallaire in the house up next? And while she's getting all set up, I encourage everyone here to take a quick body break, stand up, little stretch, maybe a couple jumping jacks. We've been doing a lot of sitting, so I encourage you while Christine Dallaire is getting set up to get your body moving a little bit. Yeah, we are. Sure.
Ready when you are.
All right, all you.
Okay, well, oh, my slide is not at the first. Okay, well, bonjour tout le monde. I'm going to talk to you today about a project that you might want to integrate to do your fourth year research project or to do a master's. So I'm a prof in the sociocultural studies of sport, physical activity, and leisure. And this project is specifically looking at how young adults are giving back to the community. At least that's how they talk about what they're doing through their coaching or other volunteer or paid positions that they're doing in the field of sport and physical activity. So this larger SSHRC study is a comparative analysis where I'm looking at young adults, 18 to 25-year-olds, so young people like you, that invest themselves in sport leadership roles, but not just because of sport or not just because it's a job, but also because they see it as a way to give back to the community. So they see it as a way of community engagement. And I'm interested in how they understand and make sense of community engagement and what they're doing to make the community a better place to live in. So we're doing different case studies where we work with different community partners that run sport programs for youths. And here the youths are children and adolescents, but they attract former participants. And so I am interviewing young people that were former participants in the program and come back. So we're interested in understanding how they conceive of the community, who is the community they're giving back to, and what motivates them to give back to this community. We're also interested in understanding how they make sense of the different responsibilities they take on within these organizations and their different actions or interventions or their different roles that go beyond a dedication to sport. Now, of course, they have to kind of like sport, otherwise they wouldn't be doing these types of volunteer positions or jobs. But what they're doing goes beyond their love of sport. And they talk about it as a commitment to either youth, as a commitment to their community, or as a commitment to the community partner, to the organization. So I'll give you some examples. But before we get to the examples, the kinds of methods and you would be involved in through your research project or your thesis, we're looking at the different organizational documents, their reports, what they've got on the website, the different guides or the training they do of the young adults that work for them. So all kinds of organizational documents. We do interviews with the managers, the board members of the different organizations, the different employees, but also more specifically, and most importantly for this project, we interview the young adults that are working or volunteering within these organizations. And finally, interviews are not enough. When the young adults are talking to us about what they're doing, I can't get a good sense of it unless I actually see them in action. So with each interview, there's also some participant observation where I go and I see them when they're actually running a practice, when they're coaches, or when they're running a workshop, or they're working if they're working at the Boys and Girls Club. So these are the different forms of data that inform the project. We've done the data collection for 2 of our case studies, the Boys and Girls Club of Ottawa. We did that a few years ago. We still have a lot of data to go through and analyze. Je suis allée aux Jeux de l'Acadie, à la finale des Jeux de l'Acadie. And so this is another case study that is available for students that are able to work with interview data and documents in French. We will be doing, hopefully, I don't know we'll be able to do it this summer because of the COVID-19. If Le Patro and the Ottawa Latin American Soccer Club are able to do any sporting activities this summer, I'm pretty convinced they will not want to have any researchers around. They'll have their hands full with just trying to manage the pandemic and whatever may happen to their programs, because we know the uncertainty and we have to reinvent ourselves over and over again with the lockdown, and we open up and a lockdown. And so I suspect that if we're able to start the research with our community partners, it will be in the fall 2021. So what would you do if you were to do your research project on our different case studies? Well, with the Boys and Girls Club, as I've said, we have all the data already. So you would have access to the documents, of course, to all the interview data with the managers and the interview data with the young leaders. And so it would be up to you to determine what research question you want to explore with the data that we have. So what I would do is I would give you access to a few interviews of managers and of young adults, and then it would be up to you to read through it and try to see what it is you're interested in that you would like to pursue further. And you could do that over the summer. So you could do the research project in 4 months, do it from May to August, and then you're done. Your research project is done. Or you can do it over the year from the fall term until April 2022. I've had a few students who started the research project with me in the past saying they wanted to do it over the summer. It's never happened. They never finish. I'm not going to have a whip, and I'm not going to force you. It's your research project. You do the work when you're ready. And so you can start in the summer. And if you finish next April, well, it's up to you. It's your schedule. My role is to support you and help you through it. Now, if you were to work on the Jeux de l'Acadie, it would be the same thing. You'd be working with secondary analysis, but it would all be in French. You could work only on the Jeux de l'Acadie for your research project, or you could, if you were going into the master's in September, you could do a master's with thesis. And in this case, you would likely do a comparison of the data between the Jeux de l'Acadie and the Boys and Girls Club of Ottawa. And again, it would be up to you to determine the research question you want to pursue. And what kind of comparison you want to do with the data we have available. The disadvantage of working with secondary data is that you haven't done the interviews yourself. The advantage is that everything is there. You could be done within 2 years, your whole program and writing your thesis. So there's advantages and disadvantages, but the partnership with the Boys and Girls Club is not completely over. And so I could likely organize it so that you could go and do some participant observation to at least get a sense of the organization so you could better understand what the interviews are talking about. As I've said, I don't think we'll be able to do some data collection next summer. Le Patro is in French only. The Latin American Soccer Club, if you speak Portuguese and Spanish, that might help as well, but I'm expecting we'll do most of that data collection in English. So there would be no data collection next summer. So it would mean that you would do most of the project over the fall and winter terms, doing some document analysis for sure, and participating with me with some interviews. If no interviews with the young adults, at least interviews with the managers and the leaders of this community organization. And you could contribute to writing the report for the organization. If you wanted to do a master's with thesis, then I'm pretty sure we'll be able to do some data collection, if not in the fall next year, definitely spring and summer next year. So you would participate in the whole process of data collection, then you could do your thesis in the second year of the master's. This is overall what you would do if you wanted to work on these projects. I think I have 1 minute for questions.
Yeah, somebody actually asked if you would provide your email.
Of course. Actually, it's, I thought I stopped sharing, but it looks as if am I still sharing?
No.
No, okay, good. Yeah, it's easy. Just Google U Ottawa, Christine Dallaire, and you'll find me, or you, my, whatever it's called. My ID for the email is CDALLAIR, what appears at the bottom of my picture on the camera on the Zoom right now, at uottawa.ca. So it's quite easy to find me.
Not much more than us. We only have
I think we have a few more minutes before the next, yes, thank you for posting. That is my email. I think we have a few more minutes before the next presentation. If there are any questions on what you would actually do, if you have any questions on the data we have. Oh, I see Pascal is presenting after me. Okay, I was coming from a session with him just before. So Pascal is going to hear this a second time again. To give you a bit of taste of the data we have so far and some of the comparisons we've been able to make. The Boys and Girls Club. So again, in both cases, we are dealing with former participants. So young adults that as teenagers or children, they participated in the Jeux de l'Acadie or the Boys and Girls Club. What we found is that the young adults that get involved with the Boys and Girls Club when they've outgrown the programs, they get involved because they're very, very loyal to the organization, to the Boys and Girls Club. And they talk about this organization, not in the ways that it saved their lives, not as strong, but almost as strong, that it was a safe space, that it was a place where they could feel they were part of the community and they made strong links, but they have a very, very strong attachment to the organization. So when they're coming back and they get involved as volunteers or as youth employees, they make minimum wage. You don't go back for the money, and you always end up working way more hours than you're actually scheduled. So it's not an issue of money. They're doing it because they want to help young children that were like them. They want them to have the same opportunities they had through the Boys and Girls Club. So they do it because of very, very strong attachment to the Boys and Girls Club and to help the young people develop these skills. Whereas at the Jeux de l'Acadie, well, you don't know me because I haven't taught you, unfortunately. I'm an administrator now. But I've done a lot of research in the past on youth identities, and particularly in Francophone communities. And so while I might have thought that the young leaders that are coaches at the Jeux de l'Acadie, so former athletes at these games that return, while I might have thought they were doing it because of their commitment to la francophonie and their sense of belonging to the Acadian community, I was way off base. No, they're doing it for youth and they're doing it for sport. They come back because they so much enjoyed the opportunity they had to participate in these huge games that are kind of like the Ontario games or the Quebec, the Jeux du Québec. They want other children and other adolescents to have the same opportunity. So they're doing it for a commitment to youth and a commitment to sport. But the difference is that for them, the Acadian identity is taken for granted. So they don't need to talk about it. So you do interviews with them and they don't talk about how proud they are being Acadians because it's a given. Compared to Franco-Ontarians, in Ontario, we are not only proud, we put it in your face, and we learned that we are to say bonjour in French, and we learned that we have a responsibility towards the community, and it's at the forefront. For the Acadians, they don't describe their Acadian identity as having a responsibility to the community. So it's very different the way they speak about why they are involved in the games. But in the end, it doesn't matter whether they're doing it because they want to help the development of the Acadian community, because their involvement in the games has a consequence of helping the development of the community anyway. And so these are the kinds of things you would find by working on this project, is looking at the different reasons, motivations, and how young adults make sense of why they're involved in community development projects and the effects they're having on the development of the community. Alors, merci à tous pour votre intérêt. I hope you find a project that piques your interest so that you get involved in the research project or that you decide to come and do a thesis with us in our master's programs. Bonne soirée.
Thank
Ciao,
you.
Christine.
Pascal, just before you begin, I just want to let everyone know that if you take a look at the schedule I sent, that Google Doc there, all the sessions are in English now. So if you would like to attend, like you can see who the professors are for the next 3 presentations or so. If you want to hop to the other link or hop back, just so everybody knows. See you later. Thank you. All you, okay, Pascal, all you, I'll give you the 5-minute wave so that you know when it's your time's getting close, but right now
Okay.
it's your time to shine.
Super, right now? Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for being there actually on this very nice Friday. So this is a great pleasure to share, you know, what we're, I guess, playing with, or we've been playing with over the last year, because this year I must admit that I'm on a kind of a halt because of the pandemic and because of the fact that we're dealing with, you know, a vulnerable population. You know, the lab activities have been stopped to some extent, but hopefully in September we'll be back in action. So for the next couple of minutes, I'm gonna hopefully entertain you about the secret life of a tissue that we all have at different level, I guess. And this tissue is called adipose tissue, or your fat reserve to some extent. And this is a picture of what those cells constituting your fat tissue are looking like. They look like grapes to some extent. And this is what we're gonna talk in the next couple of minutes. So why we're interested into the fat tissue at some point is simply because this is probably one of the largest or amazing tissue in terms of plasticity, in a sense that, you know, some individual throughout their life will maintain a very stable and reasonable amount of fat reserve, and other, and this is affecting, as you know, most of our population right now, considering the prevalence of overweight or obesity, will gain subtle fat mass over their life and will at some point develop an excess of adipose tissue. And that's what we're interested in the lab. To some extent, we're interested in the potential alteration that are associated with the excess of adipose tissue. So to some extent, you know, you gain a subtle amount of fat mass. And as you know, we are facing human different moment in our life where we're more, I would say, vulnerable to gain some weight. And you're actually in a moment right now of your life where you're more vulnerable than any other moment to gain some weight. And I refer here to the freshman 15 college phenomenon, right? So if you're students and you just got started your life in apartment, you may be likely prone to develop some adipose tissue over your bachelor. So hopefully not, because you guys are all active, right, in human kinetics, so it should be fine. But, you know, this is an example of how subtle could be this fat gain process. Now, of course, you know, fat tissue is, when in excess, related to different metabolic problems such as type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and osteoarthritis. But remember something, that right now, if you're like me, you're probably, you know, an hour or so after your dinner, your fat tissue is quite important, because your fat tissue is, you know, responsible of storing this energy that you consume at dinner, and it stores this energy very preciously in those cells that I showed you about a moment ago, and has the potential to release those substrate of energy later on when you're going to need it. So fat, yes, at some point can be detrimental when in excess, but it's a key organ responsible of maintaining yourself quite healthy. So we're focusing in the lab to different function of this tissue. That is the white adipose tissue here. So this is the real name of those, you know, fat reserve that we all have. And as you know, you probably know a couple of those functions already. So your fat is quite important for insulating yourself when you're exposed to cold, for example. Fat tissue is also key when you knock yourself close to a table or when you fall on the floor. You know, this is quite important to buffer the fall or the potential bone breaking that could happen after a fall. The major function that you're all aware of, and I just mentioned about it, is the function of storing and or mobilizing those excess of energy within your fat cells. So we're all able to quantify those function in the lab, and I'm going to talk to you about this in a moment. A function that really triggered my personal interest in that field has been discovered back in 1994 when I was actually completing my bachelor degree, as you are right now. And another function that I'm going to refer to is called a secretory function. So your fat tissue is not only responsible of all those three functions, but every day your fat are producing proteins that I'm calling adipokines. So this is a word that you can keep now forever, but those proteins are actually responsible of regulating a lot, not to say 1,000 of physiological functions such as appetite regulation, insulin resistance, cardiovascular disease such as hypertension, thrombosis, and insulin sensitivity. So every day on a daily basis, your fat cells are producing those factor that we call hormones or adipokines to inform the body about what's going on in your organism. And this is what we're doing in the lab. So we're interested in better understanding those adipose tissue function, and to better I guess refine some intervention to either treat or prevent obesity. And the way we challenge the fat reserve, we do that in a different ways. And this is the portion of the title of my presentation that I was referring to when I say external influences. I refer to the impact of weight loss, cold exposure, heat exposure. We're also doing projects exposing people to hypoxia milieu. So we lower the concentration of oxygen in the ambient in the room, for example, and we're looking at the impact of all those, I guess, external influences on those function of adipose tissue to better characterize, how it works, and hopefully to come up with some, I guess, further insight or further intervention to prevent or treat obesity. Just to give you a broad glimpse of what we're doing, I prepared a little video. We always say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I'm going to leave you to this, and you're going to have a look of what we can do in the lab, basically. Superb. So this gives you an idea about, the potential approaches that we're taking. And basically, this is all done to better understand the regulation of the growth and or the secretory function of this tissue that we all have, adipose tissue. And all this to, I guess, the ultimate goal of what we're doing is to, I guess, better understand the pathophysiology, the treatment, and hopefully develop some prevention regarding obesity prevalence. And as you can see, this involves like some approaches that are coming from basic science up to the human intervention. So we've got a very, I guess, wide range of array that you can jump in. Currently in my group, I've got some human kinetics student, of course, and I do also have some nutritionists, some psychologists. So we have a very broad, I would say, interdisciplinary approach regarding what we're doing. And these are the tools, static tools that we have the chance to use actually for our research. And hopefully when the pandemic will be gone, I'll be more than happy to give you a real tour of all this. So that would be it for me. If you guys have any questions, comments, I'm definitely open to answer those. Cheers.
Thank you. I liked the video. That was a great addition.
Excellent. That's good. Yeah, I was wondering, well, at the end of the day, like this, you need to put some spicy into this.
A little funk, huh?
Voila, we should have danced. I saw you moving, so I'm glad that you enjoyed.
Actually, I did have one question for you.
Sure.
The little space helmet kind of situation, is that for hypoxia? Or is
No,
that for?
no, this is actually like called an indirect calometer. So this is basically an astronaut helmet that we put over your face to collect what you're consuming as oxygen and producing as CO2. The hypoxic room actually is the one at the bottom right now. So it's actually a room like your living room, and we can play with the oxygen level in that room. So we've got that at least, and we can simulate altitude there. And yeah, this is a great room actually. We can play with temperature, humidity, and oxygen level.
Very cool. Anyone else have any questions? If I get questions a little later on, you don't mind if I send them to you in an email?
No problem, Hannah. I'll be pleased to respond to those.
Perfect.
I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to leave the floor. Oh, we've got 5 minutes, but Allison is the next on the podium, I guess.
I think we actually have Michael Delisio next.
Oh, Michael. Okay.
Yes.
Super.
We have Delisio in the house.
Here he is.
See him there, so he's here. Perfect. Well, thank you very much for spending your few minutes of your Friday night with us.
No problem, guys. Enjoy, and hopefully I'll see you in the near future.
Perfect. Thank you.
Cheers.
We have Michael Delisio on the floor next in about 4 minutes. So I urge you to take a little body break. Make sure you give yourself a little stretch, get off your bums for a few minutes and move around a little for 3 more minutes before Michael Delisio takes the floor.
Dr. Raimbault, if I may, I just had a question regarding, because I think you referenced to adipose tissue as like an organ.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because I know, like, obviously organs are comprised of different tissues. So then if you're calling, I could have completely misunderstood, but then how is adipose tissue then considered like an organ per se?
Because, well, when you say that an organ is defined as
a combination of different tissues.
Right. So, well, the adipose tissue per se, like the slides that I showed you, are referring to the major constituents, so cell, that are making up this fat tissue. But, you know, within the adipose tissue, you also have like other cells. I wouldn't say tissue, but other cells that are composing the adipose tissue. So you've got some fibroblasts, you have, and Michael will allude to that in a moment, actually. You also have some immune cells. And that's why we call now the adipose tissue an organ to some extent. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you for this great question.
I actually have a question as well.
Hi,
So
Trevor.
so you talked about your research had to do with like adipose tissue and like different health effects such as cardiovascular diseases. Is there other types of research that you do on adipose tissue? For example, like just like weight loss stuff and stuff like that?
Yeah, actually this, well, last spring, you know, before the pandemic, we were supposed to start a very big intervention with my colleague Eric Doucet and François Mann, where individuals living with obesity were going to be and will be ultimately, because this is going to start, we have funding for that. So people will be exposed to caloric restriction with or without cold exposure. So this is an intervention that we will hopefully start as soon as the pandemic will, you know, fade off. Yeah.
Awesome. And what sort of requirements would a student need to to get into this type of research? Like, is it
Mhm.
like cell biology, or do you accept human
No,
genetics?
no, not at all. Like, and I'm an example of, I've done my bachelor in human kinetics. Of course, I really enjoyed all the physiology class and the metabolism kind of class. So if you have an interest into this, you can definitely be on board with us. You don't need to have a white lab coat on, because the intervention that we're doing involves different aspects. So we need some people that are going to be in touch with the participant. We have some other people that are more in the biochemistry world, where they're going to, manipulate the biological sample that we're taking with our participants, such as blood or fat tissue. But if ever you're interested into this, you can be coached. And, I've done it myself. Like, we have I guess, the staff to coach you if ever this is of interest. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
No worries. Hey, Michael.
Hey, Pascal. How's it going?
All right, my friend.
Yeah, good. Good.
You don't have your offices next to each other now, all down the same hallway. There's not as much catching up, is there?
Exactly.
Oh, don't see anymore. I'm sure you miss me.
I do. And I have 25 witnesses now.
All right, we're gonna turn the floor over here to Michael Delisio. I'm gonna give you the little handshake when you got about 5 minutes left, and then you can choose to proceed with your presentation, or you can turn it into questions.
Okay, perfect. Can you guys
And Mike,
see my...
I'll stay with you to give you some support.
Oh, well, this is lots of pressure then. Can you guys see my screen? Okay, so this is probably a tough act to follow after Dr. and Bo for sure, but so I'm going to give a quick overview of the lab just so students can kind of get an idea of what's going on, and then if there's specific questions, you guys can follow up. So I like to call my lab the Exercises Regenerative Medicine Lab. So what regenerative medicine is not just trying to stop a disease or stop a pathology, but actually to repair the damaged tissue, or in the long term would be to regrow damaged or lost organs. And we do this by focusing on two different tissues mostly. One is the immune system, which is derived from stem cells inside of your bones, inside the bone marrow. They're called hematopoietic or blood-forming stem cells. And then the other tissue that we focus on is skeletal muscle. And so obviously they're both very relevant to exercise, acute exercise and training. In the bone marrow and hematopoietic system, some of the questions we ask are revolving around how does your blood cell production change with chronic diseases such as obesity or cancer and cancer-related therapy. And so what we've shown in our lab is that these types of chronic diseases actually shift the decisions that your blood stem cells make. So instead of having a nice balance between making kind of immune cells like your T cells and your B cells, they actually produce more of pro-inflammatory cells like monocytes, which then go on to become tissue macrophages, which Dr. Bo might have talked about in the context of obesity and adipose tissue. So in these chronic diseases, you're getting more production of these monocytes and pro-inflammatory cells. This is called myeloid skewing or myelopoiesis. That's kind of the fancy term for it. And then as you get an overproduction of these cells travel to distant tissues and they disrupt tissue function. So they can disrupt adipose tissue function, and we study how they can disrupt muscle and other tissues function. The other side of things here, why is this not progressing? There we go. So then what's really important in deriving some of these decisions of your tissue stem cells and kind of what cells to become are these cells or their environment, right? You guys might have heard the saying that you're kind of the average of your 5 closest friends or your 5 people you hang out with the most. Well, stem cells can kind of say the same thing. So whatever is closest to the stem cells, whatever cell types are close to them, is going to kind of dictate what they do and what they become. And one of the most important cells that are in that environment that stem cells live in are these cells called MSCs, or mesenchymal stromal cells. And you guys might have heard of these because they've been pretty popular in different cell therapy applications lately. Like people are using them, injecting them for stroke applications and several other diseases, even for some COVID. There's actually work going on at the Ottawa Hospital where they're using MSCs to prevent some of the inflammatory reaction from COVID. And so we study these MSCs, and we study two sides of them, how they change in disease and how exercise can kind of reverse those changes or improve those changes. And some of the things that we're showing is that in chronic disease conditions, these MSCs are skewed and become more adipocytes. So these are actually precursors to fat cells, and they can become more fat cells. So we see this often with obesity where they're making more fat and they're actually making less bone. And so this is a problem, obviously, in the bone marrow, because you can have brittle bones, and getting more fat inside of the bone marrow is problematic for your immune system. They can also release factors. So basically, MSCs can talk to other cells in their environment by spitting out proteins and other factors that then can communicate with the other cell types. And what we're showing is that exercise can actually inhibit some of the negative or pro-inflammatory factors released from MSCs, and can also inhibit some of this adipocyte formation in the context of these chronic diseases. So this is kind of generally what our lab does, and then we do that in kind of specific things or specific conditions. And so why is this important? Well, it's important for a number of reasons. Basically, in the big picture, what we're trying to understand is how exercise works. So we know that it works in most cases, but we don't really understand how it works. And by better understanding how it works, we can do several things there, including creating better exercise prescriptions. So more specific prescriptions, right? That aren't just related to improvements in, say, VO2 max or improvements in muscle mass. Maybe we can have prescriptions that are specifically related to reducing inflammation, which the current guidelines are not based on. They're based on just fitness, which is important, but these can be more disease-specific outcomes. Another thing that we can do is we can develop exercise-inspired therapies. So I don't know if you guys probably know this, actually, that only about 20% of American or Canadians meet the physical activity guidelines as set out by CSAP and other organizations. So people aren't exercising, even though we know it's good for them. So if we can develop therapies that kind of mimic some of the effects of exercise, that would be a good thing. So people don't have to exercise. And so by understanding how exercise works, we can kind of develop these therapies. And then another thing that we can apply some of this information is by using it as an adjuvant therapy. So for example, if someone is getting a treatment for a condition, can exercise enhance that treatment or enhance the efficacy of the drug therapy, for example? And so by understanding how it works, we can kind of make some innovations in these three areas that are relevant. What specific projects or what specific aims are kind of we're focusing on the lab? And so the overall goal is to really understand how stem cells in muscle and in bone marrow interact with their niche, or the MSCs, basically, in the environment, and then develop these novel or new exercise-inspired therapies for these chronic diseases. Particularly, the diseases that we focus on are obesity and cancer and cancer survivorship or cancer therapy-related conditions. And specifically, we're looking at exercise for reversing this myelopoiesis, so this skewing towards inflammatory cells in obesity. We're looking at mechanisms and how exercise can be an intervention for some radiation-induced muscle fibrosis. So this is in the context of cancer survivorship and cancer therapy. And then lastly, to understand how exercise works, we're looking at this mechanobiology of MSC. So mechanobiology means like mechanical signaling. So when you exercise, obviously, these cells are being exposed to stretch and contractions from your muscles. And then we think that some of that signaling is responsible for the beneficial effects of exercise in these cells. So if you come to my lab, what kind of models would you be exposed to, and what would you kind of learn about? So we try to be a very translational lab. And so we have projects going on that use different models of in vitro work. So we have cell culture infrastructure and equipment. So we can actually take cells out of mice or humans and grow them and then study them kind of in a dish. We also have exercise interventions in mice, and we can do a lot of, running and some more invasive kind of work in mice. And then we can also do human studies. So in the fall, COVID permitting, we are going to start an exercise training intervention with a bit of diet manipulation, where we're hopefully going to take muscle biopsies and blood draws and isolate cells from these tissues and study them directly from humans. So a bit of variety anyways from the type of models that we use in my lab. So what does it look like? So maybe Dr. Mbo showed you this, but this is kind of the shared exercise facilities over at Lee's campus. And so there's a bunch of ex-phys researchers who use this stuff, but we have the standard exercise equipment, treadmills, bikes, weights. We also have all the stuff for testing VO2 that you guys probably have seen in some of your labs. And we also have stuff for measuring body composition like DEXA and all that kind of stuff. This is my lab space. Actually, my main space, wet lab space, is over at RGN, or Roger Guindon. This is kind of our wet lab area. This is just an example of what our lab bench kind of looks like with all of our wet lab equipment. And we also have a cell culture room. This is kind of where we grow our cells. So these are the 2 hoods, some incubators, and we can grow our cells in here and do some manipulations on them in vitro or outside of the body. This is an example of a former HK student who did her 4th year thesis in my lab. And this is just kind of showing her working at the lab bench. What she's actually doing here is isolating protein from muscle. So she's got some liquid nitrogen. She's going to dump it into this little mortar here and chew up some muscle and isolate some protein. And is waving at me. So that's it. This is just, this is kind of an old picture. This is pre-COVID, so I got to update it when we're allowed to stand that close again. But if you have questions or you want to contact me about working in the lab, you can check out, or you can send me an email right there. So I can take some questions here for the last 5 minutes.
You create quite the mouse house. They had a couch and a treadmill, those mice there in that picture.
Yeah, it's luxurious. It's pretty luxurious for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If anyone has questions later on, do you mind if I follow up in an email to you?
Yeah, it's totally fine. And I didn't put my lab website in there, but I don't know if you guys can share it with it, but it's deliciolab.ca. Actually, can I put it in the chat?
Yeah, you can.
Ooh, I'm gonna stop my sharing. There you go. So all the instructions for how to apply for a position in my lab are on the website.
And Jamil's in your lab, right? Or was in your lab?
He was. He
Yeah.
was in my lab for a bit, and then he moved to greener pastures in Dr. Doucette's lab.
Cool. Well, thank you for your time this Friday evening.
No problem, guys. Enjoy the rest of your night. Thanks for organizing this.
No worries. Have a
Dr.
good night.
Delicio, sorry, I did have a question for Dr. Delicio.
Sure.
So when you're doing like human culture or like muscle biopsies, do you run into like any kind of ethical troubles, or does it kind of like limit what you can do? Because like, for example, I know you can't take like a muscle biopsy from a child or something like that. So do you come into any ethical kind of dilemmas that kind of impede your research?
No, you can get muscle tissue from people under 18 if they're like part of surgery or something like that. We don't do any of that. We don't have any projects like that right now. But no, you know, we submit our protocols to the internal ethics board, and we follow all the appropriate guidelines and everything like that. So we haven't had any issues yet so far. So
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you.
okay, well, have fun.
Thank you.
See you later.
All right, everybody. We've got one more presentation this evening. Let me check. I think Allison's up there. Yes,
The
welcome.
last but not the least.
You're rounding out our evening tonight.
Yeah.
I'll give you the quick little wave 5-minute warning. Either you can continue your presentation to 8:15 or you can stop and have a question period. Totally up to you.
Okay.
All right. Go whenever you feel like it.
All right. There you go.
As an intro, I would like to say that Alison has been hired last year and she's the star of the group.
The young ones, the young ones
That's a
are
good
pulling
intro.
ahead, aren't they?
Yeah. So like you said, I just started in the department in January actually, but I thought I'd tell you about a specific project that I've worked on and kind of my general research interests. So I'm going to talk about using computer models to try and understand how patient-specific factors can affect surgical outcomes, specifically at the knee. So I mostly focused on the patellofemoral joint, which is the joint between your kneecap and your femur. So you can see here, and there's lots of muscles and ligaments and tendons surrounding that joint as well. And some of the main problems that people can have with their patellofemoral joint are patellofemoral pain and instability. So these things aren't really that well understood. So in terms of the pain, it's not really clear where specifically the pain is coming from. And similar to instability, there's lots of different causes and they're not super well understood. And part of the reason is because it's so difficult to measure the patella. So it's this little bone that moves around a lot under the skin. You can't really measure it with your typical motion capture because of that. So it's been very difficult to measure in the past. And there's also a lot of variability in patients. So all kinds of different factors are quite a bit different from person to person. And because of this, the treatment for these disorders is usually very patient specific. So one of the factors that's been looked at that contributes to these types of disorders is the actual shape of your knee. So this is one study that looked at this, and they compared the depth of the trochlear groove. So this is the groove at the front of your knee that the patella sits in. And they compared that between people who had patellofemoral pain and people who didn't. And they found that the people with pain tended to have a more shallow, flat groove. And the people without pain had typically a deeper groove. So that's interesting. It seems like it could be an important factor, although because it's just looking at correlation, we don't know if that's actually causing the pain, but it seems like it could be important. And you can also see there's a lot of overlap still between these two things. So what we were interested in trying to do was actually find out if there's an actual cause and effect relationship between this. So to be able to really isolate the effective geometry and see how that affects the function of the joint. So the idea is to be able to change the geometry and see what happens in terms of function. And that's not really possible to do in live humans, obviously. So that this is a really good application of computer models, because in a computer model, we can actually change just the geometry and see recognition technique called principal component analysis. And it basically just pulls out these shape features. And they're the shape features that are the biggest sources of variability in that set of knee geometry. So the shape features that are most different between those people. So these are the first two features that we got here, and you can see them changing. If you look at the second feature here, you can actually see that trochlear groove, the depth of that at the front of the femur here is changing from shallow to deep. So it actually pulled out that feature, and then using this, we're able to change that geometry. So we can create new models going along this that are deep or shallow trochlear grooves. And then we can take those models and stick them into our musculoskeletal model. So in this case, we're using motion capture data, and we have this model that has all the bones and muscles and things, and basically fit that to the motion capture data. And it uses some optimization to try and figure out what the muscles are doing. And then we can get things like muscle forces, ligament forces, the cartilage contact pressure. So you can see the actual stress on the cartilage here as this person is walking. So this lets us basically estimate these things that are really hard to measure in real life. So like I said, basically what we did was take these different shapes and stick them into this model, have it walk the same way, but just have a different knee geometry. And then we wanted to see what happens. So with this feature here that was this changing groove geometry, we had different models that ranged from a shallow groove to a deep groove. So these shallow ones are shown in blue and the deep ones are in red. And we can look at things like the forces in the ligaments. So this is the force in the medial patellofemoral ligament. So that's shown there on the medial side of the patella, holding it on. And there's actually a really big difference in the amount of force in that ligament just by changing the geometry of the bones. And if you think about it, it makes sense. So in the knee with the deep groove, that the bones are actually holding the patella in place because it has a nice deep groove. But in the shallow groove, the patella can slide around a lot more. And that means those ligaments are having to work harder to keep the patella in place. So that's why we're seeing more force there. And we can also look at the cartilage contact stress, like I mentioned, and this is showing just throughout walking there. But if I just pause it at one point, what we saw was that in the shallow groove knees, there was higher stress on the cartilage. And this was interesting because this can help us start to get at maybe some cause and effect relationships and how these shape features can contribute to pain. So one theory is that patellofemoral pain can come when there's too much stress on the cartilage, and that causes stress on the underlying bone, and that can lead to pain. And here we see that having a shallow groove causes more stress directly. So maybe that could be one reason why this shape feature is more prominent in people who have pain, because that shallow groove is causing more stress and that could lead to pain. So this is interesting to understand how these factors relate to this disorder. But then the question is, what do we do with that information? So if we know that, if we find out, for example, people with a shallow trochlear groove are more likely to have pain, we can't really change their geometry of their knee very easily. So we need to, so what do we do with this information? And one thing we can do is try and then use the same approach to look at how different treatments affect these different geometries, so that you could then decide based on someone's knee geometry or other characteristics what treatment is going to work the best for them. And you don't have to try a bunch of things and see how they work. You just know what's going to work. So one treatment that we looked at is called tibial tubercle osteotomy. And this is a treatment for an unstable patella. So people whose kneecap actually dislocates or just slides around too much. And that causes lots of pain and problems, obviously. So what they do with this surgery is they're basically detaching where the patella tendon attaches on the tibia and just sliding it over. So that helps to pull the patella in and keep it from dislocating. So we wanted to see what happens with this surgery, how does that change if you have a different knee geometry? So for this one, we made a whole bunch of different models. There are 750, and each one of them had one of these different knee geometries going from the shallow to the deep trochlear groove. And then we randomly moved the patella tendon around and did the same walking simulation with all of those different models. And because this is a surgery for stability, we wanted to try and get at that idea of stability. So in the walking simulation, we actually applied a force on the patella. You can see it here, a little green arrow on the patella while this person's walking. So we're just poking that patella, and then we can see how far it moves. So if it moves further, that means it's less stable because it's not staying in place as well. So that gives us a way to see how these things are affecting the stability. So basically, this is sort of what we found. So this is showing the results of all those different models. This is how far the patella moved on the y-axis here. So if it's a bigger number, it's less stable. And then across the x-axis is how far the patella tendon was translated, left or right. And then the colors are the different shapes. So basically what we found was that there is a difference with the different geometries. So with a deep trochlear groove, you can keep translating the patella tendon and it'll keep getting more stable the more you bring it in. But in a shallow trochlear grooves, if someone has a more flat groove at the front of their knee, there's some point where if you go past that, it starts to get less stable. So you can go too far basically, and you need to be more careful with people with that shape of knee when you're doing this surgery to make sure you're not actually destabilizing the knee more. So basically, the idea here is that we have this kind of framework we can use to look at, modify these different features that are related to specific patients and understand how those are going to influence different treatments. And that lets us basically be able to better target treatments to specific patients. And I talked about the musculoskeletal modeling here, but I'm interested in doing this using a bunch of different methods. So traditional, like regular motion capture, different imaging modes. And then we also just got a markerless motion capture system. So that just uses regular video cameras. That's what this picture here is at the top. And it can measure the movement without having to put all these markers and things on. So that will give some interesting opportunities in the future. Yeah, so that's all I had to say. If anyone has any questions, and thanks to everybody for sticking around for the last presentation.
That was a good way to end. That was really interesting. All the motion capture stuff is really cool to look at. So cool. Thank you. Anyone have any questions? Anyone in the house? No, no questions. You don't mind if I send a follow-up email if I get any questions later on?
Nope, that's fine.
Perfect. Thank you for your time this evening.
Okay. Thank you.
Just for everyone in the video, I think, or in the video, sorry, in the Zoom, I think that at 8:15, they're doing like a closing remark in this Zoom link. I think it's just saying thanks for attending. And if you have questions, follow up with us. So if you feel like you're done now, then you're welcome, obviously, to tune out whenever. But we do thank everyone for being here, and especially all the professors who took the time to come and talk this evening. We really appreciate it. We had more presentations this year than we've ever had, and I think that is because of how online can do wonders sometimes. So that's good. We did have a question about where the recording would be posted. Really good question that I don't know yet. Once we have both recordings from both sessions, we'll figure out the best way to post it. So by the end of the weekend or by the end of the day on Monday, you should have the recording.
Thanks for organizing this, Hannah.
No worries.
It makes our lives a lot easier.
It was all Jamil, but I'm happy to pass along the message.
Perfect.
Hopefully you guys got some good answers to questions about internship, especially I know a number had been emailing about internship. I hadn't seen a lot of questions about research yet, but it's really interesting. I think Capstone is a great way to show a lot of the research that's available, and I don't think a lot of people realize there's so many different areas that they could choose for a research project, and it's not sometimes the same as kind of what you always think. So really cool to open our eyes. I see it